Hi, this is Joel Rosenberg, founder and editor-in-chief of All Israel News and our sister site, All Arab News. I'm coming to you from Jerusalem, and it's been a fascinating and very intense month in Washington and throughout the United States as President Trump has stepped down, President Biden has taken office, and there's been a lot of, let's say, brouhaha in midst of all that. One of the most well-known and respected evangelical leaders in the United States is Governor Mike Huckabee, who serves on the All Israel News Advisory Board and was our first interview on the website here at All Israel News. And I just want to welcome you back. There's a lot to talk about. Governor Huckabee, thank you so much for being with us again.
Well, Joel, I heard what you said to your team when you said you were having me back. You said, let's give this guy one more chance. You really messed it up.
Fake news. That's fake news.
I'm delighted to be back with you. And boy, you're right. We've had quite the month in January of news here in the U.S., as it has been for the rest of the world. But it is very timely to be able to visit with you again.
Well, thank you. Well, let's break things out. Obviously, we need to talk some about what's going on in Washington. And obviously, you have your finger on the pulse there. And obviously, we want to talk about what's going on in Israel, too. And your very close friend, Prime Minister Netanyahu, facing an election, closing down our airports, lots of challenges here. And so I don't know which political system is more intense right now in the United States or here in Israel. But let me start with some news in your own family. You have a lovely daughter who served very faithfully at the White House, and she's announced for governor. This is a nonpartisan site, as you know, but congratulations to her and to you, and that's going to be a fascinating race.
Well, I appreciate that. The site is certainly nonpartisan. I am, however, not. I am very partisan.
Really? Because I hadn't seen that before, but that's good. We're breaking news here.
I'm about as objective toward my daughter, Sarah, as the New York Times was about Donald Trump. So that'll give you some idea of the intense favoritism that I have toward her. She did announce officially today that she's running for governor of Arkansas. I think it's pretty cool for a lot of reasons. One, I think she would make a terrific governor. She's strong, she's smart, fearless. But I also think from a personal side, for her to become the first woman governor of Arkansas would be significant. There's a even more personal side. I think it would be pretty awesome for someone who grew up in the governor's mansion to go back there, not as a kid growing up, but as the governor. And for my 3 grandchildren who are hers, I have 7 total, but for the 3 of them who are hers, the great thing is they'd never be able to hide from her. She already knows where all the hiding places are on the entire property.
Governor, as you say that, it reminds me of a story that I wouldn't have imagined talking to you about at the moment. But you and I were having dinner with the Saudi ambassador, Rima bint Bandar, last year. And we were in the Saudi ambassador's residence in Northern Virginia, where she grew up as a child. Her father was maybe the most powerful and influential Saudi ambassador, Prince Bandar, in the history of the kingdom, and she was telling us stories about her brother setting the one of the well, I shouldn't tell all the stories, but her little brother set something on fire, but anyway, there she is serving, and that brother has obviously come a long way. He's serving as the Saudi ambassador in London. So when children grow up in this, it doesn't necessarily mean they're going to go down the same route, but it is interesting what Sarah's doing.
Well, sometimes I think kids who grow up in a political family are attracted to it, and they sort of are so close to it that they grow up with a sense of purpose and direction because of it. There are other children who rebel against it, want no part of it, run as far away as they can. And quite frankly, all 3 of my children, I think Sarah's probably the only one that will ever run for office, but all 3 are politically active and highly involved. And on a personal level, nothing thrills me more, not because they're interested in politics, but it's really about that they have not rejected what they have seen their dad do, and they haven't been so turned off by it that they just wanted to run as far away from it as possible. And I've had many friends in the political world who really had broken hearts because their children rejected not just political involvement, but rejected even the positions, the values, and the stands.
Well, of course, you had famously Ronald Reagan's son, Ron Jr.,
absolutely.
Sort of break away. And yet on the Bush side, you had two sons that got very involved and went very far.
Sure. So it happens. And I think that my joy of Sarah, first of all, she is a strong pro-life, pro-faith individual.
I'm guessing pro-Israel, too.
What's that?
I'm guessing that she's quite pro-Israel, too.
Oh, yeah. In fact, that was what I was going to say, I took her to Israel when she was just a little girl, and she's been with me several times. And one of my favorite stories to tell, and one of hers, is when I took her to Yad Vashem when she was only 11 years old. And the impact that had on her was profound. And she will tell anyone today that the trips to Israel, and particularly that experience at Yad Vashem, was life-changing and life-altering for her, and helped her to really formulate in her heart the importance not only of standing with Israel, but of standing for what's right and being willing and understanding that there's a price to be paid for standing against evil. And if more people in the world had stood against the evil of the Nazi Germany regime, there might not have been a Holocaust. And it happened in large measure because so many people looked after their own interest, looked the other way, and thought, well, this doesn't affect me and my immediate family, and I've got to protect myself. And as a result, the whole world suffered immensely. So that's what I'm really proud of her for, is her fearlessness when it comes to facing that which is evil and being willing to stand against it.
Well, I appreciate that very much. And let's use that to shift a bit to what's just happened in Washington. We obviously want to get your take on what are you optimistic about with Biden and what are you concerned about. But let's just start with some public comments that you made about the final days of the Trump administration. And I think that you used the term, which was strong, because you said that you felt that those final days had sullied the reputation of the president, who is somebody you know so well and have supported so strongly. But still, you were honest about. I mean, if you were quoted correctly, so I shouldn't assume that, but you had some concern about how that all played out. And I think so. I'd love for you to just to share that in your own words. People can see it, they can hear it, because I think evangelicals, even those who strongly support the president and felt that the worst things have been done against him, many are wrestling with, okay, maybe it's not impeachable, although some feel it is, but it was painful because it leaves a legacy. Even Ambassador David Friedman told the Jerusalem Post, look, this is not what we signed up for, and he was quite disappointed. So I want you to share in your own words just how you see it, and we'll talk about how to go forward and how evangelicals should look at this coming year.
Well, first of all, let me clarify. I did use the term. I said I felt like that the last 4 weeks of his presidency had sullied the previous 4 years. And what I meant by that was not that I was, abandoning ship. I'm still a loyal friend and supporter of President Trump. And I felt that the tragedy was that a legacy of accomplishing more than any president in my lifetime. I'm not being hyperbolic there. That's not a Trumpian statement of being hyperbolic. It's true. Was being overshadowed by his having handed his enemies, his true enemies, people who hated him, a weapon that was unfortunate because the controversy over the election, which I believe was a legitimate controversy. I think there are many of us, of the 74 million who voted for President Trump, there remains sincere questions about the anomalies and the irregularities of the election. I'm not saying the election was stolen. I know others have, including former president. I can't say that because I don't know. But what I do know is that there were enough questions, there's enough of a cloud that I felt like that Joe Biden and the Democrats should have insisted upon a full audit of the election results. Because if those of us who questioned it are in fact wrong, we need to be proven wrong. And if they were to unveil all of the questions regarding the election, and it turns out that there's no cloud on his presidency, then he's in a stronger position I think he goes into office. I'm not going to be one of those people like we've dealt with most of the Democrats for 4 years. And this I find amazing. They somehow think that we're crazy because we didn't accept the election results. Think about all the ways the Democrats said, not my president. And for 4 years, they said that he was a fraudulent president, that the Russians had put him in office. And that was okay to think that. My point was that President Trump has a remarkable record as president, a truly stunning list of accomplishments. And that all was forgotten in the last 4 weeks because he gave the media and his opponents so many ways to deflect away from the accomplishments, focus only on questioning of the results, unwillingness to concede for a long time until the very last week. And then, of course, the tragic events of January 6th at the U.S. Capitol. I do think that there were people other than Trump supporters involved in that riot. But let's be crystal clear. There were Trump supporters who were a part of the vandalism, the violence, the mob action that is inexcusable. It's criminal, it's thuggish, it's anarchy. And I gave no quarter to those people who did that, regardless of their political ideologies. If there were some Antifa people mixed in, punish them as well. But those of us who were so adamant that we should prosecute the people who burned the cities of Portland and Minneapolis and Seattle and San Francisco and New York and Chicago and Detroit and Atlanta last year and many other cities, we have to be consistent. And because it was an attack on our nation's capital, the very seat of our government, it amplified it and accelerated it. So that's part of what was very unfortunate. Having said that, I've been absolutely adamant that President Trump did not incite a riot. I've read his speech twice. I've watched it on video 2 or 3 times, carefully analyzed what he said. And I don't think that any objective person can read or view that speech and say that he incited a riot or that he encouraged people to go and do damage to the Capitol. Public officials regularly say, go to Congress and talk to them. My goodness, we have many incidences of Democrat politicians, including Pelosi and Schumer, encouraging their supporters to go to the Capitol, sometimes even a little bit more, let's just say, flamboyantly, saying, get in their face and yell at them. That's not unusual. But President Trump did not ever encourage people to go down there like a mob and break through barriers, bust windows, assault police officers with U.S. flags. So anyone who suggests that he did is being dishonest. And that includes some Republicans like Mitt Romney, who should be ashamed of himself, utterly ashamed of himself.
Do you think, specifically as the Senate now moves to hold a trial, I can't say that I'm a constitutional scholar, but just the simplest reading of it suggests that the constitutional remedy is to remove a president from office. So what's not clear to me is the basis constitutionally for having a trial after someone is gone. Alan Dershowitz, admittedly a friend of the president, but a liberal and a constitutional scholar above our pay grades, us combined.
Absolutely.
Jonathan Turley also saying there is no remedy. So you can't have a trial if there, but I don't know. I mean, I'm not trying to put words in your mouth. I'm just trying to understand, is there a constitutional basis, even if in your view, he would be found innocent?
No, I don't think there is. And I hope that the president's strategy legally is to ask for a dismissal and really demand that the Supreme Court on its face throw this out, because he's not president. You can only try, convict, and oust a president. Well, he's not a president. And there's, it's like a posthumous trial, almost as if you
politically posthumous, just for the record. But yes, I understand.
Posthumous. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And there's nothing to do. And you mentioned 2 of the people I trust most on constitutional law, both of whom, by the way, are liberals and who did not vote for Donald Trump, Jonathan Turley and Alan Dershowitz, one from Georgetown, one from Harvard Law, esteemed constitutional scholars who look at the law, what I would say, and I mean this in a not a religious way, but they look at the law agnostically. They do not look at the law to come to a conclusion. They look at the law to determine what the conclusion should be. So they don't say, here's what I believe. Now let me get to the law and see if I can make myself right. They say, blank sheet of paper. What does the law say? That's what we ought to apply. And both of them adamantly, not even with a hint of confusion, say that there is no constitutional basis to try the president. This is political theater. And the worst is, Joe Biden should be the one who publicly says to the Senate, stop this nonsense. I'm trying to bring the country together. This only further divides us. It's an insult to the 74 million people who voted for President Trump. There's no point in it. There's no value in it. It does not do the country any good. And as a result, I'm asking that we put this aside so we can focus on COVID. We can focus on the economy. Joe Biden could do, I think, significant things for his presidency, but his not saying that and his letting this go on and pretending somehow that he can focus on his agenda, but the Senate is going to be totally consumed by this nonsense, tells me that the rhetoric about unity that he espoused during the inaugural address is just that. It's rhetoric.
Well, you may be right. And I think that when I look at Biden, look, he's very liberal in many, many areas, especially on social and economic policy. On Israel and the Middle East, I find him a little bit more centrist, though I'm concerned about Iran and how he might go back into the deal. But, there's a piece of me that I don't know if I'm being extra kind, or if I'm being accurate, that I think there's a piece of him that does believe in bipartisanism and would like to see unity. But the fevered pitch on his left is probably more than could he stand up for it? Yeah, he could. Whether he will, it seems unlikely. Let me ask you, though, let's again focus on evangelicals. John McLaughlin, who has done much of the polling for President Trump and for Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu, came out with a fascinating survey. We at All Israel News asked for the evangelical crosstabs because he was dealing with issues of, do you think that we should, is impeachment the right thing to do, or is it a waste of time? Most Americans thought it was a waste of time and money. Obviously, Democrats broke differently than the Republicans, but when we asked for the crosstabs so we could report on that, it was very interesting because, yes, as you would expect, most evangelicals felt that the president should not be impeached, felt that this was political theater. However, the numbers that there was actually a third of evangelicals, self-identified, born again, white evangelicals, who said they thought he should be impeached. And 42% disapproved of his final weeks in office. There wasn't a question, so I don't see any way to extrapolate that over the last 4 years. Sure. But when we reported it, just because we thought it was newsworthy and showing the tumult that had been created over the last month, the blowback from folks on Twitter and Facebook saying fake news. Why do you? And most of them had not read that this was the president's own pollster. My point is, what is your advice, both as an evangelical and one who was a Baptist pastor at one point? What's your advice for how evangelicals should work their way through it? And I'm not even talking about getting ready for 2022 or anything political. I'm just saying, as a follower of Christ, the grief process that people are going through for a number of different reasons. Sorry, that's such a long setup to the question, but I am curious, sort of, how are you counseling people, advising people who are people of faith in Christ?
Joel, what I try to remind people is that it's always appropriate and it's biblically centered to be able to separate the individual from the work or the deeds of the individual. And that goes back to King David, who had some horrible deeds, but yet God described him as a man after God's own heart. Samson committed an egregious sin, but it did not erase how God had used him. One could look at the Apostle Paul in the New Testament, same conclusion. Paul did some horrible things, persecuting the church, but he was redeemed. Throughout Scripture, there's always been a sense in which, while it's ideal for us to live holy and righteous lives, I'll put it in real simple terms that my boyhood pastor used to say: God can hit a straight lick with a crooked stick. And what he meant by that was that
that's very Arkansan. So you're going to have to, New Yorker like me, and now a Jerusalemite, you're going to have to help me.
Got to explain that one, huh? But, the fact is, God has always used flawed people. And by the way, if he ever has used me, he used a flawed person, because I'm certainly far from everything that I need or want to be. And the errors of my own life make it so that I can't say, well, if God had only picked me, he would have a completely 100% righteous individual. Here's my counsel to evangelicals is simple. If it's okay to be disappointed in things Donald Trump said, or the manner in which he said things, or even disappointed in the things that he did in the last 4 weeks of his presidency, when maybe he instilled a false sense of hope that the election results were going to be overturned. I had some hope that maybe there would be revelations that would cause the results to be different. But once the Electoral College had certified the vote, I felt like that there was really not a legitimate pathway for that to happen. And I also want to say, Mike Pence was right when he said he did not have the power to overturn the election. If you think about it, you don't want a single individual, even a vice president, to just decide, I'm going to overrule the courts. I'm going to overrule 50 states and their electoral college voters.
If we had, think of two examples. One example, of course, would have been Vice President Nixon could have completely overruled and overturned the very close and probably stolen 1960 election in his own behalf. That would have been an interesting story. And then Vice President Gore could have taken those 500 and whatever votes in your now home state of Florida and said, no, I'm not doing that. Imagine the constitutional crisis. That was, I think, for me, one of the areas that really just disappointed me about the president. And I agree that, look, I was a never Trumper. I've been very honest about this. In 16, I was happy if you won, if Rubio, if Santorum. I mean, there was a lot of lists of good people. I wasn't for him, but at the last moment, I did vote for him. And I'm not saying this to be a partisan, but analytically, I'm just saying I saw some negatives that concerned me. Sure. Then I was very impressed by how many policy moves he made, that including on Israel, including on Iran, including on so many issues, the Abraham Accords, so many things here in the Middle East. But at the end, I thought one of the most faithful, evangelical, trustworthy, honest vice presidents that we've seen, admittedly a personal friend, Mike Pence, but to get thrown under the bus on January 6th and then the days that followed, that bothered me a lot. And I think it bothered a lot of people. And we know it bothered Pence.
Well, there's no doubt about that. And that's why I said what I did, that it sullied the president's reputation, because he deserved to have an extraordinarily wonderful legacy that we could celebrate. And I still do celebrate it. That's what I'm saying. I want to make sure people understand. I am able to separate the last 4 weeks of a very stressful time in his life from the previous 4 years in which he reshaped the entire Middle East alignment, in which he recognized Jerusalem as the eternal home of the Jewish state, where he moved the embassy after all the presidents before him for 26 years had promised to do it and failed to do it, for his having gotten out of the Iranian deal, strengthening Israel and weakening Iran, which is, again, a big part of the realignment. And we could go through all of the countries that now have diplomatic relationships with Israel because of the president. Or look at the tax cuts, which gave the average American family, this wasn't about rich people. The Democrats tried to portray it that way. The average American family, working class people, ended up with $6,000 a year more money to do for their families than they had before. And the deregulation process that he put into place freed up small businesses. And if it hadn't been for COVID, I mean, the economy was red hot and on fire until COVID.
Rebuilding the American military in so many significant ways. You're right. It is a legacy that's, and I think we all think, wow, if you could dial that clock back, if you rewind time, go back to the future, as it were, and say, okay, it was a hard loss, it was a painful loss, it was a controversial loss, but you walk off that, you take some time, you write the book, the others on your team write their books, and you begin to reevaluate. That's a very different situation heading into his future, and I think, again, I'm not trying to focus on the Republican Party so much as evangelicals are processing that. So, all right. So you said one, biblically, you just need to separate. First of all, not throw a person under the bus because they've made mistakes. Leave that room for redemption, prayer, and remembering the good while processing honestly the bad. Is there any other pieces of advice as we go into 2021 for evangelicals in particular?
Well, I think we need to buckle up. We're in for a rough ride. President Biden has already made it clear that he's going to put a focus on non-restriction of abortion up until the point of birth. He's already rescinded the Mexico City policy, which certainly has an impact in our foreign relations regarding abortion, meaning that we can conduct abortions on use U.S. money to help do abortions in foreign countries. That's a reversal of the pro-life policies that we've had in place. I think, too, the bizarre approach that President Biden has toward transgenderism. It's the interesting thing. It is not just an affront to evangelicals who believe that male and female, he created them, as the scripture teaches, that there are two genders, not 57 or 112. But it's the fact that now you have people on the left, particularly in the lesbian gay community, who are outraged of elevating transgenderism because, particularly for women, it basically says, women are not really a gender. They don't matter. So for 150 years, women have fought to be treated equally, and suddenly they don't exist anymore, which means that all sports, a 16-year-old boy who is physically capable of running faster, jumping higher, can just say, I identify as female, and win every championship in the female division, though yet he is a biological male. People are outraged by this. So I think President Biden is off to a rough start, but for evangelicals, what happens when Christian colleges are told that they have to not just allow for, but they have to accommodate and promote transgenderism in their dorms, on their athletic fields, in their classrooms? How does that work when Christians who have very distinct attitudes about the separation of the genders and the respect and for the modesty of each individual sex, when they're told that they can't do that anymore, and if they do, they will be labeled a hate group? It's not about so much losing federal funds, because a lot of Christian schools and colleges don't get any, but when they lose their tax exempt status, when they are targeted for expulsion from every accrediting agency, when their schools are not even able to bring a student on for Pell Grant, or they can't have an ROTC program. I mean, there are many, many implications for this. And I think Christians better understand this is real. And this is going to be an upheaval.
For the fight. It really is.